Welcome. So glad to have you here with us today. I'm Ivory, and this is Roz. We're the Sedona Soul Sisters. And today's topic is spiritual bypassing. Before we get into that, I want to say hello to our listeners in Corvallis, Oregon. You guys show up week after week. Thank you for being with us. So glad to have you here. This is a topic, the spiritual bypassing. Those of you who've been watching the show for a while, you remember Terry Ann, our wonderful other soul sister we miss so much, and she talked about this a lot. I experienced it. And first, I think we better talk about what spiritual bypassing is. And it's really just using spiritual ideas and concepts to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. To me, what this really is about getting all the learning and never putting it into practice, not doing the introspective work, just reading, going to, and it makes me laugh. Roz, you will remember me telling you this because, and I'm so sorry if you guys are listening, but there's several men in the Sedona area that I went out with who started grilling me immediately. Have you read this book? Have you been to this workshop? And when I would say no, they'd be like disgusted with me. And I'm thinking, as the date went on, I could tell, yeah, you went to all that, but you are not being very spiritual, some of the things they said and did. And so I watched that and I thought, that's when I realized you cannot intellectualize your way to enlightenment. At some point you got to put this stuff into practice or it doesn't do you any good. And Roz and I talk all the time about the need for introspection. How do you grow spiritually or personally if you're not willing to go inside to look at yourself and better yourself, right?
And you have to, it's more than just saying that. I mean, you have to dig deep, and you really expose some things about yourself sometimes to you that it's never even crossed your mind. And I always, tell people, I meet a lot of people who are going, well, have you read this book? Well, have you done this? Well, have you ever heard of this person? And I'm not even subtle about it anymore. I'm just going, nope, I don't read. I don't have time. I'm on a mission here, definitely, to accomplish helping as many people as I can help. And I got to be focused on that. And I've got to make sure that my energy and my intention is on that. So no, I'm not researching. I'm not reading. I hear what I hear. I see what I see.
I do read books. I read books, but my thing is, I think I practice what I preach in that when it comes to spiritual books and self-help books, you need to read a little bit and then put it aside for a while and let that absorb and put it into practice. Let yourself really think about it and how it relates to you and your life, and then read something else for a while. Roz and I both are voracious readers, but I can't do my spiritual work all day long and then come home and dive into intense books night after night. We both get pretty exhausted. We love what we do, and it's imperative to us to do our missions. But I just want to say, if you're doing that, if you're pouring yourself, like reading every book you can get your hands on and going to workshops and seminars, slow it down a little bit, because it's really time to think about how much of that information are you actually doing in your daily routine. And it doesn't mean everything you learn you should put into your daily routine, but you read a book and then maybe there's a few concepts in there that really resonate for you and that would benefit you, and you put it into your daily routine. Not everything in a book, not everything in a seminar. Some of the things won't be right for you.
We all have different needs, different focus of energy in our work too. So I think, one really important lesson for me, because when I was younger, I mean, I think I was in some ways fairly judgmental, and that, was in my case at least, kind of self-defeating. You can't be passing judgment and deciding, oh, well, this person is this. Well, you don't know. You got to be tuning in and talking to that person, and really to help them, you have to be really focused on them, not on what your mind is telling you. So, and I always tell people the other thing too, of course, about me is, if you're expecting me to have read and done all this stuff, what you have to realize is I'm usually functioning on how things feel and words that are presented to me, or if I hear guidance speaking, I have to be attuned to that. It's important. I can't let my ego take off and go off on some tangent. So
It's tempting sometimes, though.
yes.
And it's true. I think that we tend to fall into spiritual bypassing when we're going through something really messy, human experience, when we're not at our best. We're not thinking straight. We're having a hard time dealing with everything coming at us. And frankly, from a mental health point of view, which you probably know my background is in the field of mental health, I know that what's going on in the world right now, everybody's at least at an 8 on a 1 to 10 scale of stress on a daily basis. So it doesn't take much to put you over the edge now, because there's so much going on, so much hitting us. It's been going on for over 2.5 years now of this stuff, just one thing after another. So this is a time we have to really be vigilant about not falling into spiritual bypassing. And I think one good thing is to pick your favorite book you've ever read that's about spirituality or self-help, if that's where your journey, and go back and reread it, but read it 3 or 4 pages a night, or even a couple times a week. Put it aside, read something else, do whatever you usually do, let yourself absorb it, and really start going back through the process of, is this something, you can ask your angels, you can ask your intuition, is this something that will benefit me to put into my daily routine? As a life coach, that's kind of really a life coach approach, is to take a piece of information and ask if it's going to benefit you, and then put that one thing into practice for 2 weeks and then reevaluate that. We don't pile a bunch of new stuff on top of a person and then expect them to make these massive changes. With everyone already at such a high stress level, you need to be gentle with yourself right now, but you must do the introspection. And Roz is right. Sometimes it's not pretty. Sometimes, for all of us, we look at ourselves and we're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have responded that way. I could have handled that better. I really want to be a more patient person. I really want, Roz mentioned judgmental. That's something I had a supervisor in mental health for a while who had gone through a 12-step program, and she was really vigilant about that. And I would hear her gently and politely say to people, what you just said is very judgmental. It's judgmental. We don't know. For instance, I worked for a clinic that served homeless and low-income people. And so somebody would pull up in a Cadillac, and all these people working there would be like, oh, they shouldn't be here because they're driving, if they can have that car. And my supervisor would say, you know what? We don't know if she's living in that car. We don't know if that car is all she has. You don't know how old that car is. Maybe she's just taking good care of it. You can't judge like that. And she would be very kind about it, but it really was good for me. I don't think I've ever been super judgmental, but I became even less judgmental through working for her. And Miriam, if you're watching, thank you for that, because it was really good to watch her handle that. And it really was one of those things, sometimes you witness something, but it's a lesson for you too. It's not directed at you, but it's for you too. Kind of like getting mediumship in a group setting. Somebody gets a message and it's for you too.
That happens a lot.
Yes, it does. So we have to, in moments like that, you have to be more cognizant of your personality. You know, I like to reflect at least once a week, like, what's my biggest weakness? What's my biggest character flaw? What do I need to really work on? And I'll tell you who is really good for putting that in your face is your family. You know, something that irritates you about your family, you can say, you know, do I have that same trait? Do I have that same trait? Is that why they drive me crazy? Is that why that particular thing makes me nuts? And a good deal of the time it will be. So take all this information that you're gathering, all these lessons, the knowledge, and put it to use, you know, actually making changes. We want to try, to be honest, I'm really coming to the conclusion, Roz, that a life purpose is primarily not about what you do for a living, but how you live and the person you are. Did you come in as one thing, as you were, as your soul was, and did you improve yourself through the process of that lifetime? That's your life path. What you do for a living is just part of it. Oh, the angels are coming in. I am so covered in chills right now. The angels are coming in and saying, yes, that is true. So it's just been a recent revelation that it's really not so much about doing spiritual work or whatever you do for a work. That's just a piece of the puzzle.
I think too, you know, you can spend a lot of time burying, you know, issues, burying the things that, because we all have things we kind of just don't want to address. And we can bury those things and we can bypass them by finding all kinds of other really excuses to, you know, find your way out of having to really take a look at how did I handle that? I mean, and of course, I have the benefit of what I feel now is extensive age, which I think
you are not extensively aged.
Well, I
You're
feel
hilarious.
I'm shocked when I think about how old I am. All of a sudden, I'm like going,
You feel old.
Wait, when did that happen? But you know, I think that happens to some of us, and it certainly started happening to me when my grandchildren started being born. I was like going, whoa, whoa.
I was so young when that happened. I didn't have that experience.
I know. Well, you got married so young and started having your family so young, had your daughter. I mean, you were still a baby. I was already in my 30s and old when that started. So, but I really
smart.
feel like, you know, looking at, it's almost like, and I think, you know, I think I'm doing some writing now, and I think that brings things back too. I mean, suddenly I remember things that were happening in my early 20s that I never really thought about. You know, I was just helter skelter going 100 miles an hour doing everything I was doing. So there is a benefit of age.
And I think there's times when you have to allow yourself to spiritual bypass. When you are overwhelmed, you're unlikely to be able to put things into practice. And I think back to something I think about quite frequently since COVID, because I have a lot of alone time. So I'm thinking more than ever. And I realized that in high school, especially when I moved to Prescott in the middle of my junior year, something terrible had happened to me the year before. And I didn't get any help for it. I didn't tell anybody. And I was in this shock, really like an emotional shock. And I was just going through the motions. I went to class, I did my homework, I had some friends, but the whole experience had nothing to do with the high school or the people there. It had to do with me, that I was not in a good place at all. And I went through those years that year and a half left, they're like in a fog. And it's interesting. Like I tried to think about like certain things, like why didn't I start this at this stage? Why wasn't I thinking this? Because I was in crisis, and I was reading information about spirituality, and I was studying things back then, but I wasn't putting it into practice because I was in a state of shock. And I don't think you can expect that of yourself. So that's another time you just really need to be kind, gentle with yourself, and not expect too much while you're in that state. But once you start coming out, then if you want to be better, if you want to avoid having situations like that again, if you want to get stronger, wiser, have better boundaries, all those things, then you got to start putting information into practice. It's imperative. It's kind of like, do you think that you can study to be a doctor and never work on a patient and be very experienced? Imagine if doctors started out and they'd never seen a patient, they didn't go through residency and all of that. It's really, that's where they take the knowledge and they put it into practice. I think that the spiritual bypassing actually is a stage of spiritual development. When you're new on the path, or you've just had your awakening and you're hungry for information, and you don't even think about, diving into yourself. You're trying to get knowledge from outside of yourself. But at some point, and here come the angels again, coming in strong on this, at some point you have to go inside, because a big part of the journey is found there. Your higher self talking to you, you're communicating with your angels, looking back at your life. So many people having past life memories. I mean, that is just huge.
I think too, now we have our culture has shifted, due to the awakening, due to so many changes that are occurring, and the realization for many people that things, exactly what you're saying, really, things went by when you were younger. They were kind of like a blip on the radar screen. They went by, and you didn't really process those things. You didn't really dig into that and take a look at that, and take a look at how it impacted and how it affected your life. I can certainly remember some events that happened when I was high school age, like you're mentioning, that definitely shifted my outlook on some things. And I feel like think about the 60s and the 70s. And I mean, we are really much more outspoken and much more direct about things that are happening now than we were back then. And
a different world.
It is a completely different world. And of course, we have social media to look through a lens. It's a different lens.
It's hard to feel alone in an experience when you've got that much potential communication with so many other people who've been through whatever it is.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, like, what are some of the common forms of spiritual bypassing? Like, what might that look like? Have you heard of toxic positivity?
I have.
That is a form of spiritual bypassing where you are refusing to see that everything's not okay, everything's not wonderful. You're determined to be grateful and joyful all the time. Like, that's not realistic. There's times when things are hard, times when you're feeling bad mentally, physically, emotionally, and those need to be addressed. You need to deal with it and think about it and process it. Another one is when you're too hard on yourself. If you think and say bad things about yourself, that's just another way you're kind of focusing on who you were at one point and what everyone else thought you were and said you were, instead of maybe who you are now and where you're headed, who you're becoming. It just keeps you from appraising yourself accurately. And a third one is being afraid or reluctant to feel or express anger, especially women, because so many of us are raised believing that anger isn't spiritual, anger isn't ladylike, or if you were perfect and spiritual enough, you'd never get angry. I think it's how you get angry. I think it's fine to be angry. It's letting yourself feel your feelings. And so if you're in touch with your feelings, you're not gonna get stuck in spiritual bypassing too easily or often, because it is about getting in touch with your feelings and staying in touch with them. And it's always funny to me, like when you hear about people like, I don't know how to express what I'm feeling. I'm like, really? Because I can give you 50 words for how I'm feeling right now. My feelings, it's kind of like Roz, we go by our feelings. And so for a person like that, that's just like, I can't even fathom. I understand that happens. There's people like that, but I can't relate to that. I know exactly what I'm feeling, but that helps you. So once you can get to a point where you can identify, there's a thing in mental health, and actually it's kind of not a good thing, but I think it's helpful for some people. There's a chart in mental health that has all these little smiley face and angry faces. And for people who have trouble identifying their feelings, it's a good idea to find that chart online, print it out, and every day point to the picture that represents how you feel. And there's a word under it, there's an emotion under it, so that you start getting used to identifying how you're feeling. It's a big part of this. So there's a guy named John Wellwood, and I found a quote from him that I thought was interesting. He said, when we are spiritual bypassing, we often use the goal of awakening or liberation to rationalize what he calls premature transcendence. And that's trying to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness before we fully faced and made peace with it. And it's only when we go through the real and messy stuff that we find healing and relief. And I believe that is so true. I think that's brilliant, because if the people, and I can think of some even very well-known people who I think do this. I'm never going to name names about that, no matter how much you bribe me with things I love. You can tell they haven't worked on themselves and they're really stuck in ego, but they talk a good talk. They put the words out there, and they're insistent that if you just think happy, if you just feel happy, if you feel grateful, we do. Roz and I both think that's really important, but we don't feel happy all the time, do we, Roz? No, I've seen Roz get furious. I mean, she gets nasty if she doesn't get her lunch in time. I'm just telling you this right now.
When my blood sugar gets low, everybody better run.
Angry. I will feed her really quick. Eat a bagel, please.
And I laugh about it, but I know this about myself. So you'd think that I would put some little snacks around, or at least take some kind of avoidance action for that effect of the low blood sugar.
She needs a little protein pop.
The funny part about this is, I think, for me, I mean, I've just always had, a pretty feisty temper, even as a little child. And it was kind of a joke in my family. I mean, they just had to laugh sometimes when I'd go off on a tangent. And it's pretty funny, because when I see this in my grandchildren, I go, oh, a little bit of Roz there, but hope their mom's able to help them overcome that, because it's not a positive management resource to use, that suddenly you're like a raging maniac. So fortunately, that is one thing that has balanced out better in old age. And I'm thankful to say that.
She's mellowing out. We're all grateful, Roz. We're all grateful.
Sure.
I had a guy ask me, I was waiting to go into the dentist office in Prescott 2 days ago in an interior courtyard. And he comes in, he smiles, and comes back and he says, hey, are you a natural redhead? Yes, I am. Oh, I'm going to leave you alone then. I've been warned. I said, yeah, probably for the best.
Yeah.
So what do you
Especially
think
when you're at the dentist?
If you think you're spiritual bypassing, or you are, like, how do you stop it? I think honestly, it comes down to be authentic. Don't try to be something you're not. Don't try to make yourself feel something you don't feel. Don't try to be somebody else. It's really just being authentic of who you are and being in touch with your feelings. That doesn't mean you have free reign to be a maniac to go around and terrorize people, but just to really be yourself and be who you are. Like Ross says, she's feisty. So she stays her feisty self. And I have my moments, I do have red hair. Yes, I've always had red hair. So yes, I have my feisty moments as well. But ask yourself questions like, what action requires the most faith right now? And you can invite your shadow self, which is the side of yourself you don't want to look at, the side of yourself that's maybe character flaws and emotions you exhibit and things you do and say you wish you didn't. Call that self into the exercise, fears and all, and ask your whole being, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And ask the questions and listen to what your angels tell you or what your intuition tells you. Because you can lead yourself astray just continuing to read and read and read, because you're absorbing somebody else's words and thoughts. But it comes down to putting them into practice and then making them your own. I really have always been big on this. Like, you can learn all kinds of things, but it doesn't mean you have to say it the way somebody else does or do it the way they did. You figure out a way that works for you. But if you never tune into your feelings, how do you know it works for you?
Good point. I mean, you gotta really not go into heavy analysis, but definitely you have to really feel that response, I think, more than just intellectualizing. You have to really get into the way that you are responding emotionally in those kind of situations. And so always knowing before, I try to always, have myself on an even keel, since I am feisty, where I want to make sure that I'm keeping my balance with it all. And bypassing, using anger to bypass is very common too. Just like the other side of it, where you're intellectualizing and you're
or the
looking
toxic positivity.
Yes, and all of those things. So there's many aspects to this. I had never delved into spiritual bypassing. And so when we were talking about this as a subject, I went online and I was looking at some different information on it. And the one thing I realized is that because I think of social media, because of the exposure, I mean, you're always on. And it's getting to be more so that way. I find Facebook, for example, has implemented some recent changes where you used to be able to, I would go there and I'm basically keeping in touch with friends a lot of the time when I'm on that. But what I realized is that because of the changes that have been made in that format, you really are 24/7 visualized, observed. People realize everything you're doing if they want to. And I find that to be pretty challenging for a lot of people, because the spiritual bypass thing, people have been able to kind of get away with aspects of that and how they present themselves and everything. I really think the further we go with social media, the further we're getting away from that. And that there's a really good aspect to that, but there's a little bit of a challenging aspect too, because the things that you kind of fudged on, that option's not there.
There's
Yeah.
one other way I thought of that is really spiritual bypassing. And that is when somebody is new on their spiritual journey or fairly new, and they really haven't done a whole lot of work on themselves personally or spiritually yet. And then they start teaching others. And so then they're putting their energy and their focus into teaching others without having had done the work themselves. Your work never comes to an end, but I really think you need to do a lot of personal work before you're ready to help others. You need to have accomplished that yourself before you're teaching other people or trying to teach other people. And that can happen. And I don't think people are doing it on purpose, but just give yourself a chance to just do your work, take care of you, and there'll come a time when you'll be led to teach, but it cannot replace your own personal journey. It's kind of like, I hate to say this, but back to the field of mental health, there were several psychiatrists I work with who were messes, just absolute messes as people and psychologically themselves. And I thought, wow, okay, that's a professional bypassing when you don't do your own mental health work and you're trying to help other people get mentally healthy. So, we see it in society all the time. It's not just in the spiritual world. So just something to think about, another thing to be aware of. Anything else you want to say about this topic today, Roz?
I just think being, for the most part, as much as we can, every moment in a conscious state is really a part of our journey. And acknowledging that, what you said at the beginning, we're not perfect. We're not the perfect example of everything you should be, but we definitely are striving
every day.
Yeah.
Constantly. That's what it takes to work in the spiritual field and successfully, to truly be helping people. You got to be vigilant about yourself. And I don't want you to think this is all about becoming a professional in the spiritual world, because it's not. It's just about your life and your spiritual and your personal journey, really. So I hope this helps you. I hope it's funny because I knew about this for a long time. I just didn't know I had never called it spiritual bypassing, but I certainly was aware of the situation. But that happens all the time, doesn't it? Something gets coined a name. So anyway, I hope it's been helpful. And if you want to know more about us, please visit us at SedonaSoulSisters.com. You'll learn all about our services and find out more about us. Subscribe to our podcast, like it. We appreciate that. And tune in next Friday. The topic is having enough. I'm looking forward to that one.
Me too.
In the meantime, have an absolutely beautiful, enlightening day.